Cool, we'll get started then. So, a bit lower, sorry. Right, so this is Statistical Inconspicuousness by myself, Brendan, and Marco Ranaldo. You are Space Boy. So who am I? I am Brendan Mcgrath. I'm a red teamer and targeted ops at Trusted Sec, developer at Preempt, Mezzo on Twitter. It's my second time speaking ever, and my second time here.
And Michael Ranaldo. I'm a senior security consultant at Trustmark. This is my first time speaking at a conference. I have spoken before, but like just in conversations, not actually at an event. And yeah, on Twitter as my own name, because that's like a millennial thing.
Right, so a bit of background on what we're doing here. So in 2022, we put out a 7-part series called Maelstrom. We went on pretty much everything from UI UX down to internal OPSEC of implants, the full scale. By doing that, we ended up looking at not necessarily malware, but red team malware as a whole, and then further into widespread malware. And we tried to figure out what was statistically average, what were the commonalities that people were doing. And obviously that led down to ML. And internally at the time at TS, we were talking about CrowdStrike, ironic, and their and how they were detecting us with ML. We were getting some issues like how you get sent to cloud, detected by machine learning. It was like, what is that kind of thing? So by doing that, we ended up looking at Ember. Ember is a data set with an additional tooling chain that comes with it to pull out a bunch of different parts of the PE, and then that's then vectorized and sent through ML. And that is how Elastic will be doing at least I think, their internal ML. So with those points of interest, we replicated those, and we have an internal, which won't be released, we have an internal parser that replicates that data set, and we can use that throughout this.
So as part of our sort of research goal, we ended up just messing around with this data set. We're basically just trying to make some interesting looking graphs, kind of just make them look pretty, playing around with matplotlib and Seaborn. Our research was mostly just focused on looking at them completely en masse. We've got a pretty interesting comprehensive list of samples. Can we parse them in an interesting way? Can we pull out these points of interest from Ember? And when we're looking at them, compare them to contemporary, third-party but good samples and Windows samples and see how they differ, and see how that might influence malware. So when we're looking at malware, are there any things that are standing out massively, just a static level, compared to goodware and Windows? So we're going to, there's a bit of terminology here, so we're going to explain that over the next couple of slides.
So that's the overall goal. But today, we're going through a subset of that because it's a lot. We have a paper associated with it, and it's already massive, and I don't think we're halfway through that yet. But today we're going to share preliminary findings. We have essentially a story as we go through this to kind of keep it consistent. They can kind of follow along with what we're thinking when we do this. And using those points of interest, we want to answer a few questions. So what are common steps people take when writing malware to avoid detections? And in this instance, when we say malware, we mean red team, pen test, whatever kind of implants. How can these in turn make an implant stand out more? Because quite a lot of the fixes that flow through Twitter are usually worse. What improvements can be made to better the implant, and what should defenders be aware of in the future? But to be honest, at this level, it's more of a vendor issue than it is a blue team issue. And we want to make you paranoid of every implant you ever write from now on.
So I'm just going to quickly see if we can get the slides to come up with the presenter view, where we've got the notes as well, because that's a bit more useful for us. There we are. So we've got some caveats here. We're not data scientists. We are just bored pen testers. Yeah, well, he's an operator now because he does red teaming, but board pen testers. We show this to two colleagues, Daniel Mead, Chris Pendowski. Really appreciate their support because we showed them our initial graphs. They were repulsed and crying. They really did not like our data. They said we should have looked at it, reevaluated our lives, included legends on the graphs. We haven't. We still haven't. Most of them don't. So, yeah. There are some inherent limitations on the data set. Malware is going to just be stuff which was captured. It's not going to be everything. It's not going to be every suspicious binary. It's just going to be stuff which looks, has been picked up by EDR, AV, REs, some guy. However, given we're just looking at points of interest, we think it's not a massive influence on the data set because obviously these stuff will have been picked up at runtime by people specifically digging into them. So, but worth bearing in mind, we have had to trim a lot of our initial sort of kind of results out. This is just a preliminary highlights reel. This is just stuff which you can also realistically action. It's not everything. And reiterate, we do have the wider white paper in progress, but it's been like 6-7 months so far, more to come, lot to do. So, there's a bit of graph here before we get onto the meat and potatoes. Thank you for your patience. You will thank us for this background sort of update once we start speaking hieroglyphics a little bit later. But just to do some jargon busting, introduce how we're going to walk through all of the initial results and just get some definitions in place. So when you say implant, standardize the terminology for what we're going to use for this presentation. It's not exhaustive. We're not authorities on this, but you've got cradle, implant, beacon, packer, loader, dropper, daemon, badger. Others are available. It's sort of BBC line. We're just going to stick here to being simple. Implant and beacon, we're going to call the raw output from the C2. So when you think of Cobalt Strike, that's your stageless DLL that you've created. Packer, when we reference it in this talk, we're just talking about a known application which exists just to make the target exe smaller, potentially doing some obfuscation work or some other bits. Dropper, just a piece of malware which drops another file on disk. And for us, for this talk, we're just going to call implant the thing you want to load and hide. Loader is the thing doing the loading. We're just focusing on the loader. We're just talking about the PEs, we're just talking about the XEs, maybe DLLs where they've been picked up. We're not going to be covering VSTOs, JScript, click once, macros, that sort of thing. Okay, just to be clear on that. It feels a little bit confusing looking at all of them, but so finally.
Yeah, there's a lot. So just to kind of clear up which phase of this we're talking about. So in a typical flow, you'll have your C2, bottom left, whatever you want to use. You get your output, shove it up to a payload server. So if you're on the left, so you've got a payload server up here, hosting the actual output from the C2. And your loader XE is commonly this, in a real scenario, it's like won't be an XE, it could be an MSC file, VSTO, whatever you want to use. That'll be this. But in this case, we're using an XE, so it's loader XE. Reach out to the C2, give me that DLL, it's going to load it, probably do something cool with the load, fire that off, and then get your C2 back. This is the phase we're focused on, that loader XE. So we're not looking at the raw output from the C2. So I guess the Havoc, what else is called a Havoc? It's a daemon, isn't it? It's not like a daemon, it's not like the beacon from C2. It's purely the loader.
We're going to settle down on the baton passing in a bit as well when we move on to the chapters, but it keeps your eyes moving, keeps it engaging. So first off, we're going to just describe the three main groups that we collected our data in here, and then we're going to explain the process of data collection. So first up, we have malware. So this is the badness we collected from online data sets. Somewhat counterintuitively, this was the easiest to get a hold of, but we'll go into that in a bit. This is the stuff which you're going to be typically executing as. This is what you kind of don't want to look like. So when we're going through the presentation, we're going to be comparing stuff to malware as sort of an idea of if it's pretty distinct, this is what not to do. We've also got goodware. So this is good software. You might just call it software. This is just your typical third-party stuff. So Spotify, Chrome, Minecraft, Adobe Reader, CrowdStrike, stuff which is non-malicious and not going to harm the system. And this is what we want to mimic and we want to pretend to be like. Not in all cases. And then we also have, so we've called it WinWare for this presentation all the way through our now huge Jupyter notebook. It's called Windows, but we've called it WinWare because it's Windows software, and that makes it cool. And it's cool to coin new words. Not that Microsoft is not already a portmanteau of, yeah. This is just a Windows executables, DLLs, Office, VS, first-party software that's been published by Microsoft, created by Microsoft. Technically, yeah, it's a subset of goodware, but we just thought it would be interesting in terms of the ultimate blending in. How would that compare? And we have actually got some interesting differentiation between that and goodware, which we'll show you, because that's what the talk's about. It is worth keeping an eye on how your approach might influence you and keep an eye out along that way. So we're thinking like for persistence and lateral movement, pretending to be Microsoft is kind of like the gold standard in terms of staying unnoticed within the environment.
The baton pass. Right, so we're going to look at now just quickly where these things came from. So the malware, majority of it came from the software Sorrel 20 million data set. On the caveat slide at the beginning, we mentioned that this is actually one of the neutered ones. I can't remember what the optional headers are called, but they killed 2 of them. They set them to 0 to make them, I guess, not triggerable, which is annoying because that's part of the thing I wanted to map, but it is what it is. So we got a lot of it from there. Some from Malware Bazaar, and we did consider scraping VX Underground, but this was before he Smelly wanted to release his 8 terabyte disks. So we didn't do it, but it does have Cloudflare, so that would have been. Oh yeah, there was one on the way, but he lost it in transit. Well, he didn't. I think DHL lost it in transit. Yeah, that was that.
I mean, if it was them, just don't deliver parcels. Just use the internet. You've not fixed it.
Okay. So this was intense. This crashed Michael's computer. The sample set we're going to look at was a few 100,000. I think it was like 70,000 until we had to limit this TLSH graph down to 1,700. It was so intensive. Michael's PC died. But the point of this is to show that it's not all grouped. We have some groups here, I guess down here, over there, and some over there too. But the point was just to kind of show and for us to get peace of mind that we're not just getting the same family of malware over and over again. That's kind of what we tried to do with this.
We're really giving the camera guy a bit of something to do here. So, goodware. This one was a lot harder. This is, weirdly, we thought the goodware would be like the simplest one. This took a little while to do. It was a ball ache. So initially we used third-party installation managers. We used Chocolatey, Ninite, Winget. Again, if you have any suggestions on how to improve this as well, just feel free to shout out the Q&A as well. We're happy to take A's to Q's we've not yet posed. Probably a better way of phrasing that. The bulk of it ended up coming from NIST, but NIST only provide hashes. So we then used hybrid analysis to grab copies of these good software samples. However, the API for hybrid analysis is really bloody awful. It took us a lot of time to get the samples down. We had a cap set on our API requests, but the per day account didn't match the per hour account. So we ended up just constantly getting 429s. Not a fun time. Having to look up the hashes on this, downloading it on hybrid analysis. We did eventually get a reasonable enough set of samples. And then we also used Winget as well, except for this one, we did remove everything that had Microsoft or as the main publisher. Caveat with the data set, we've only really gotten the current latest version of most of the goodware data. This is something we're looking to improve, but yeah, it's like an ongoing thing. However, our feeling was basically it's between the major versions of stuff currently out there. It's not massive. This is really a contemporary look at what's currently out there, even though we're using historic stuff in the malware data set.
I don't think we've pointed this out yet, but bottom left in teal are any references that we've used throughout the way. They're just, when we release these, you can click on those and see what those are. So WinWare, again, similar to Goodware, it was kind of difficult to get. So we have a bunch of different VMs that we use between us, Windows 10, 11, had a server 2022, and what we did with those was just installed everything. So with Windows, the desktops, it was Visual Studio, all the supporting optional features, everything we could install. Destroyed a few VMs doing that. We did that, and then the same thing with server. So AD, ADCS, SCCM, all that kind of stuff. Anything you can think of that you could install on these hosts, we did. Then we did the reverse, what we did with Goodware. We did Winget, but focusing only on the things produced by Microsoft. Server roles and optional features, that kind of stuff. GIF. This GIF is awful. This is like a sample from one of the malware samples we have. And it's kind of just a quick run through of how much data comes out of this. So it's everything. All the PE, all the relocation, not all the relocations, it's relocation mappings, the characteristics of the sections, everything. So this is kind of what we're working with. So initially based on the points of interest. Oh yeah, sorry. all this and with some extra little bits came from what the Ember project pulls. So we just replicated that and used that as the golden standard of ML-based objects.
Yeah, points of interest. Yep. So there's probably a more exhaustive way to do this. We have actually, yesterday afternoon, for one of the sections, we reran, because we found a better way to parse some of the samples as well. It's taking up a lot of hard drive space. This is the current data set. You might notice it's a little bit weighted towards one side of things. So we have, let me just read off the slide. Goodware, 30,261, winware, 55,901, malware, slight discrepancy at 613,879. We haven't sampled the data because we're just pulling the same points of interest from each of the samples. We've kind of just treated it as that's the representative set. I think initially we were capping the malware at the goodware size and then sampling from Windows and malware. We were using that as a minimum. However, it was just skewing the data a lot, and we had some concerns that if a lot of the malware was the same or similar cluster, malware is going to inherently include, well, our theory at least, malware is going to inherently include more version submissions or variations of the same binaries. It's just due to the fact this data set's an aggregate of everything which has been historically caught. You're going to need to be polymorphic, polyamorous to evade detections, so stuff's going to change. However, when we're looking at it from a static perspective, you can have something which looks fairly similar but it's completely different at runtime, looks the same at runtime but it's completely different statically. So there's only so much we can control for that. And the Goodware datasets we scraped, as we mentioned, Goodware and Windows, it's just using the most recent stuff available. When we're looking at this at a wide level, yeah, obviously more samples would be better, but this is a preliminary sort of results, mostly looking at the malware anyway. So we're just using the Goodware and Windows as a thing to compare to.
Okay, so we're using a cast here of 3. We're going to map the sample types, Goodware, malware, and winware, to 3 different categories, I guess, quality of implants or something. The first one being Meterpreter. Meterpreter is going to represent our malware in this case. It's pretty terrible. It's like, it's balls to the wall, it's straight output from MSF Venom. It's probably going to be using like a hat the box kind of thing. There's not a care given to this. The next stage up from that, which is going to be our middle ground kind of thing, that's going to be what we're calling spacebar. Captain, there you are. Git FUD. So this is the GitHub FUD undetectable stuff. This is interesting. Some of these serve as actual quote-unquote FUD things on GitHub, and they never are. But what they typically do really well is like one thing. So the latest hotness, I guess, would be hardware breakpoints or exception handlers, that kind of stuff. They'll introduce the loader for that really well, but there'll be so much neglect of the rest of the binary where I can see teams thinking, this new thing is going to be great, let's use it on AB, and it's not going to work. And that's because, they do one thing well and they neglect the rest of it. The final thing is what we're going to call better asterisks. The asterisk is important here. This is just because there's a lot of caveats to this. There's a lot of things can change. Yeah, we're not the authority on what better is, so keep that in mind. But what this is grass-fed. This is looked after. It's cared for. It's had considerations for the environment it's in. The load has been carefully chosen based on the EDR that they're going up against. It's looked after a lot, and this is kind of where at least mature red teams should be looking to put their things. It is worth noting that Git FUD will probably work for like McAfee kind of things. But if you're looking at CrowdStrike, Elastic, MDE, you're going to be here. You're going to get stuck on this first 2.
So it's like a situational perspective on this as well. Sometimes you just want to get a shell now. Sometimes, you've just got something and then otherwise. But better's like where we want to be. So again, we've just used art here. It's not AI generated. There is a link to the artist there. He's sick. Have a look at it. If you get a copy of the slides, you can't click the video. So our points of interest, as we said, they're based on the Ember dataset and just our understanding of the PE and where things are going to change on it. So between sample to sample. So we're focusing in this talk on entropy, file size, imports, code signing, and compiler, but we're referencing other bits that we pulled out from the white paper. And So this is including stuff like optional headers, going into like the actual entropy, function calls as well, impersonation, other bits. But it's not something we're going to really have time to cover here. So.
Yeah, so this is the preliminary stuff. The paper has so many more niche things, but the niche things are only going to be, they're not actionable. Their purpose is to make ML detection harder. These are things you can fix now. You can go back to work, you can put in a pull request, and you can fix a bunch of these things. The section by section naming of things is much harder. You're looking at ML stuff here. This is actionable things you can fix in your generators now. So the task of what we're going to be doing today, oh sorry, no, that is not true. The task you've been given is you're on the red team. You've got something, assume breach, you need to get an implant on this host. You need a loader, but you're unsure kind of what that is, what that entails. You need to get that going. So you go to Discord, and it's not going to go well. You're going to get abused, which brings us on to our first solution.
So you get told you need to be encrypting. You shoved your shellcode into the binary, Windows Defender's not liked it, so you encrypt it. Chuck some encryption in. Mixed results. Why is Defender just eating this? Why does it just say don't run this in prod? Cool. Yes. Yeah. You don't drop it in prod if you get mixed results. Thinking here. We're not data scientists. I hope that's really obvious by this point. This is bringing you the latest research from 2006. This is 18 years old. Latest research. Really old school method of just looking to identify randomness. Basically a measure of how normal is the data. When you're encrypting, the data is going to be highly randomized. It's going to be pretty clear that you've just got a massive encrypted blob if that's the only thing in your file. This is just looking at the statistical variation in malware executables. This has been used since 2006. 80 to 90% of malware that was being examined back then was found to have encryption, and the easiest way they were using to detect that was entropy analysis. In their conclusion, they came to basically this pretty straightforward number here of above 7 is pretty certain it's just going to be malware. Whereas native executables are about 5 to 6.3. I think we went through normal written language is what, like 4.5-ish. Moby Dick was 4, 5. So looking at goodware, we've just put 7-zip and Spotify here just as an exemplar good software. Mileage may vary. Then mirroring the previous paper stats, they're sitting around 6.2, 6.5 on the Shannon entropy scale, running from 0 to 8 here. Most stuff tends to sit around 5.9 to 6.5. So you can see that. It's nice clean bulge here. Yeah. Pretty obvious. That's where normal code should be. Pretty similar results in Windows. So Windows, WinWare, mostly the same as goodware, 5.6 to 6.3. In this plot, again, we just use just random DLL and Outlook. The interesting one comes when you plot malware against this. Pretty blatant. So what we're looking at here, massive cluster towards 8. Highly encrypted data. This is like the whole thing is like run through UPX, AES. Pretty clear. This has had something done to it. Interesting thing, all the way at the other end, someone's made it entirely normal. Don't know how you do that. I think we had some ideas on lowering it to about 4, but that's basically just a file that's just full of 1 or 0. CrowdStrike. So we've introduced our cast. We have a couple of lines here. In red, we have Meterpreter. Interesting thing, that's just straight Meterpreter. I think this Meterpreter was the name of our cast member. In this case, we actually just generated a Meterpreter payload. Just a stageless one, and there it is, sat neatly where you'd put goodware. So if we compare this to the goodware in Windows, you can see a bit of a messy graph. This is why the data scientist friends hated us. When you're looking at the cast, a stage list and stage binary as well for our Git FUD. Interesting thing here is that, so the stages one, I can't remember what we ran it through. Was it VoidGate? Yeah, VoidGate. It's shout out VoidGate, but it's interesting because it is massively increased, but we're still not even managed to get to the main bulge here. But when we compare it to the Goodware and Windows, you'll see it's clearly standing out. Stageless one, much more normal, kind of blending in almost with the Goodware and Windows. However, there's a lot more to think about here. We are just doing static analysis. Smaller stub, less to work with, stage payloads are nicer, but you've then got to think about other bits to put into your binary that will then introduce complications, and you're better. So this is kind of a trend we'll see through the rest of the presentation. Doing a little and doing a lot are kind of the same result when it comes to a static review, but when it comes to putting in the latest stuff and just running with it, you're standing out a lot more. So again, just back to the thing, you can see basically the takeaway here, malware, if you're just being kind of lazy with your encryption, you're actually going to be at the point where no Goodware or Windows executables look anything like you. So this would just be a flag, but based just on that one value, you're going to get caught and seen as sus. So natural progression from entropy would be file size. The size of a binary can have some level of implications. You can use bloating tools. It's something you've seen, like just making the file huge, makes it too large a scan. It looks super weird. Like, don't use Go. Golang's caveat. It's already big. But you see from the next slide, just comparing all binary file sizes, we have trimmed like the outliers over like 1.5 times the interquartile range here. So there were malware binaries that were multiple gigabytes in size in the data set. No idea why. I think it was like some sort of heavy bloating that they're putting on. But you can see here, just as with entropy, there is a line where Goodware and Windows just stops. And so we've been able to draw that basically about a megabyte, just below a megabyte. You're almost certainly malware. So when it comes to things to avoid, TLDR, staying below 1 megabyte seems fine. You don't want to be much lower. There is some weirdness of below 100 kilobytes as well. It's not going to make or break a payload. You're not going to get banned just because your file size is big, but something worth considering, unless it's massive. So again, we've just blurred out here. We're not going to mention specific, where we've used specific C2s to generate it, because we're not poking fun at them. It's mostly an operator error that we're demonstrating here. But basic considerations from entropy and file size. Don't put massive high entropy blobs inside your binary. It's huge. You kind of want to instead try and hinder reverse engineers, get staging done, get the kill switches in place. You can have some countermeasures to this. So there's pretty basic stuff. We actually published a project called Bluffy, really basic exercise in steganography. Put it inside a PNG, regex it out, hide the data, UID max, IPv6 addresses, anything just to bring that level down. It also has an additional benefit. It just stops the reverse engineer from just grabbing the blob wholesale. There's a little level of security and obscurity, which isn't great, but it's better. And if you are doing like your environmental keying or whatever to decrypt it, it can be useful. But yeah, pretty much onwards and upwards.
The kill switch is just the extras. The kill switch is just a little caveat. I mean, when we get to the end, I have a few slides on how I personally build payloads, but the kill switch is one of my favorite things. Just by having the extra step to host it remotely, just turn it off when you got your binary. I love that kind of level of kill switch. So the second thing, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you fix your entropy, it's all good. So you go back to Discord. You get called a noob. You know, is what it is, Discord. And you get told this, and you'll see back from, I don't know if our red team is still going or not. I've not heard them for ages. But this is one of the things I published a lot of, Win API functions, and you see it all over GitHub. So a little bit of background for the imports people who aren't aware what they are. This is CFF Explorer. Does it say the file name in here somewhere? There it does. On the tab, you can see this is Notepad? Why is Notepad importing Paint? Either way, this is Notepad. Just looking at the import directory, open user 32, and you'll see some imports. That's kind of what this executable we're using. Right, so there is a thing called Mal API. Is that the reference to the bottom left? Yeah. So Mal API does this really cool thing of grouping known APIs to certain. Oh, try to go backwards or forwards. Like this. So Mal API, you'll see a bunch of these things. You get injection, ton of files. Enumeration, ton of files. Invasion, ton of files. So typically, in most proof of concepts, you'll see that chain of WinAPI calls. So you get virtual alloc, memcopy, virtual protect, create thread, wait for single object. So if you've ever written implant before, you will have probably started with these guys. And conveniently, if you ask ChatGPT for an injector, it gives you this, which proves my point exactly. Yeah, just double check. So the fact that ChatGPT spat this out kind of proves that this is like the go-to. It's like the most known way of doing this. And this is the solution you went for the first time you did this. However, you can take it a step further if you want to, and you can do something like this. You can resolve them dynamically. In this case, it's just get proc address with some strings, whatever. Maybe you're really cool and you do it with a PEB. So you've got that, which, it's cool. It's probably how the Git FUD level of things are doing it. So you've gone from, Interpreter just shoving the imports in. So now your binary's just got a list of functions that's going to do injection. Now you've resolved them, you remove them out. A potential data science solution here is to find binaries that have the get proc address but really low imports. So if it has get proc address but like no imports, then it's probably going to resolve them. And then if it's got like no imports at all, again, super weird. To take that a little bit step further, this is from our friend Rad. He put this out on his, I think it's called his MISC repo. But this is an example of using, was it RTL? What's the function called here? I don't know. It's really small. RTL register wait. So this basically just puts a thread callback on load library, then when it loads library this way, you get a clean call stack. So this is like the caveat, not the caveat, this is the difference that occurs at this level where the imports are being imported specifically. So the ones from back here, these guys, if we're using this load as an example, these would be dynamically resolved. And then you might want to use some other bits, which slide is it? This one. And then you'll also use, maybe you could import a bunch of extra things to kind of throw off telemetry, so maybe a bunch of registry type of things. So you get a mixture of imported things, and your malicious ones, resolved dynamically. So if you're also doing staged, then obviously WinINet, WinHTTP are things that will be resolved. And then the extra step that occurs at this level is the care that goes into things like the call stack. Because if you're looking at Elastic, really great call stack inspection, this would be that level, although I do think they detect this individually. If you take all the samples and you unique the imports, you get something like this. And the distinct difference here is goodware is all standard lib. Malware is balls to the ball. It's just straight up, we're going to do stuff with the WinAPI. There's no difference. So onto our considerations. I think it's pretty much what I just said. You want to resolve some functions and not others. So, as I said, you want to hide the ones that are going to do your loading process. So that'll be your injection functions, your staging functions, and then maybe not some others. So if you've got, try not to implement your own standard lib, which I see a lot of implants doing. Maybe use those, then you get more to like the level of goodware. Implement some junk kind of things, query some registry keys that don't do anything, then maybe sleep after that for a while. Just kind of make the temperature look really weird at runtime, especially with MGE when they're tracking you with ETW like that. And finally, what you can also do is you can do something like this. You got to be very careful with this, because if you overwrite functions that you need, you're going to break it. But you can use like things like the Leaf project, or if you're really fancy, you can do this at the linker level, and you can add fake imports. So what this function does is from my payload framework, not the TS one, just set one. But what you're doing here is you're dumping all the imports from a function, like MS Paint, and then creating a dictionary from those, and then pass it into this function, and this will go through them, check if they're not already loaded into your binary, and shove them in. So that way you get your code, you've got all your imports, you got dynamic resolves, all these other things, but now you get an extra layer of faked, spoofed words kind of protection as well. Yeah, and it gives you just an extra level of obscurity to it.
Great. So you fix the entropy, you've addressed the file size, you looked at your imports, your exports, code signing. You built your implant, it's finally compiled, and this is like the coup de grace. This is just the nice additions. Stuff, huh? Yeah, the cherry on the top. So what do we see in the data? Most malware does not care for code signing. We have just reviewed on the next couple of slides how malware that is using code sign has implemented it, but just standout things here. Pretty common, always surprising in Windows that a lot of it wasn't, about 50-50. Not too sure exactly why that is. It's hopefully something we'll be able to elucidate on in the white paper. But for goodware, really common now. I'm thinking it's probably because of the large amount of Windows internal stuff we've used, which maybe isn't signed or could just be old. But when it comes to how malware is signed, that's the interesting thing. So the next slide, looking at the certificate authorities that have been used across Windows, malware, and goodware, there's a couple of things that stand out to us. First one being Windows, unsurprisingly, mostly signed by Microsoft. So just because these percentages don't add up, some certificates are present multiple times in each sample. It's not a failure of maths on our end. It might be a failure of maths on our end, but we don't think it is. Overwhelmingly, Microsoft is being used to sign Windows. Goodware massively drops down, only getting about 11% of samples being signed by Microsoft directly, or there's a handful of other CAs in use. However, DigiCert comes up, a lot more common in the Goodware. You can see on the bottom right circles here, in the incredibly small font that you probably can't make out from over there, but about a third of samples are being signed directly with DigiCert cert, but if you add it all up, pretty prevalent across the whole data set. And then we get to malware, which we started cataloging the ones which were known to be stolen, but then we gave up because we got confused about which ones were. There was a lot of Googling, and this was last night, so we ran out of time to do it. But our gut feelings, basically, these ones were the ones which have been stolen and known breaches. They're known to have expired. You can see, comparing it to Goodware, they're basically not in use anymore. And then there's a little circle in the middle. So when you're looking at our cast, we're looking at the better here, because it's kind of hard to, Interpreter, you're not going to bother signing it. You get fudge, you might just grab a stolen cert, chuck it in. But when it comes to our better one, we've got Microsoft comes back again. So it's quite hard to get a Microsoft cert. It's a bit of a hassle. But if you can do it, you need to just set up a fake company or have a company that's willing to front you, buy the cert. There might be other ways. If you know if there are any other methods to get a hold of an official one, please let us know. But you also see some other paid-for vendors here coming in very low on the malware side, but a bit more common on the goodware side, like DigiCert and like the other vendors here. But Microsoft is the interesting one, I think, for us. So if you can get a hold of it, there was something we were interested in, maybe as an exercise for the audience, which was, can you use ADCS certs as code signing within an environment? Not something we're aware of, but it sounds interesting. If any of you want to pursue that and then just give us a repo that works, that'd be cool. But basically the takeaway here, don't use stolen certs. It's really obvious. It's obvious it's malicious, because at this point, everyone's known and revokes that you can, but there's a difference between, do I need a shell now? Is this the thing that's blocking me because it's not been signed? And do I want to actually have a persistent? There was a LOBAS, I think. LOBAS for certs, maybe? We can't remember. Again, we're good at our jobs.
Just go back a sec. I want to expand on the ADCS thing. So if you output a code sign set from ADCS, when I worked at an EDR company, this was something we looked into quite a lot, and it had some interesting results. But I've not seen any work happen with it. I've not ever tried it on a red team or anything. But we're very interested to know if you pull a code sign set, does EDR handle that differently? But caveat. So this one's compiler. In our experience, that's can't be unstated anymore. So we've compiled in MinGW, and it's been caught. But then we recompile the exact same code, and we just do it, and it works. And then I never really touched CLang, but when I have, it's never really been consistent. So trying to figure out why that is, right? So there's this great project called Detect It Easy. Hopefully that's what that is. It is. And this is really good. We found this Thursday evening, I think. No, we knew about this is the next few slides we found out later on. but we've realized we could do this Thursday evening. So Detect It Easy is amazing. Oh, yeah, right. So we tried to do this manually. You can grab the rich headers with the Leaf project, and you can Hasherazade, if that's how you pronounce the name, has a library, and then inside that library, there's a switch statement that tries to calculate the compiler based on some other bits of information. We tried to do that, but it was extremely inconsistent, so we ended up finding this. And if you open up the signatures and Take It Easy, you get this, where you're just basically just doing a bunch of a Pythonic switch on the linker version, and they're trying to turn it that way. There's also some other stuff like calculating some of the rich header stuff and some of the bits and pieces, but we're going to go with this. So far left, Notepad, the compiler count to be MSVC. Top right, random malware sample is, where is it, Pure Basic, or whatever that is, and Spotify again was MSVC. So this is the view you get. It's really cool. Come on, Captain. So, rich headers. These are weird. We mentioned them earlier, and we tried to do it. Well, we pulled the data. We just couldn't find the right way to do the switch on them to figure out specifically what the compiler was. So in 2020, ESET released a paper which they called Rich Headers, Leveraging the Mysterious Artifacts of the PE Format. And they say in there that this has been in Visual Studio since VS97, but they don't give any reference as to where that came from. It's a mostly undocumented feature, as of last time I Googled this. There's a bunch of research coming out of people trying to figure it out, but ultimately it looks like this. It's this thing. Next one. So what it comes down to is this. With the rich headers, they use an XOR value to try to tie it back to the compiler, the linker version, and that's the program ID and some other bits and pieces. But they use this XOR value to do that. And on the left here is like an excerpt from that paper. It's basically them just complaining about how it's undocumented and something about VS93. Feel free to read it, but that's what we're going for. So we queried our data that we had, and we just checked the Boolean, has rich headers. And that's what this is. So across the board, everything is in what was that, 65? Around 65% of things have rich headers. So we wanted to look into more that was. So we didn't trust our own parsing of it, just because the Pythonic switch was a bit odd. So we found this next thing. Elastic have this. It is a Python wrapper API thing for Detect It Easy, which is what we discovered yesterday. We ran it all day-ish yesterday, and managed to get through just under 170,000 samples of it. It took a hot while. But unfortunately, we were only able to get through the malware ones. So what's interesting here is 57% of the malware that came back was MSVC, and you can see some wild things in here, like JavaScript's down here. We've got Go, we've got Free Pascal, Masochists, Delphi, and Visual Basic. Whoever's writing malware in Visual Basic. And what we're trying to do here is tie this back to the previous slide of the 60-odd 5%. Which was this guy. And the numbers kind of match up. So on here, 57, you got to appreciate that we didn't finish the whole data set, so that number has some variance to it. But it's about the same. Where are we? We're here. So what we're trying to do here is map it back. So my interpreter, that should be the code for the compiler code. Yeah. So you can see MSF Venom compiles with MinGW. Cobalt Strikes implant is also the implant, not the loader, is also in MinGW. Gitfud, depending on the author, really comes down to MSVC and MinGW. But for the most part, my recommendation as not an authority is to do everything in MSVC. That is typically where everything is landing for goodware, malware, and obviously Windows, it's theirs. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, with the caveat of caveat of what, sorry? Oh, okay, we've not done it yet, right? So we managed to get through this for malware, but I'd imagine that you'll see for Microsoft it'll probably be a lot higher than 57% because they're not going to be doing things in it. Although you might get Rust in it now. They're moving to Rust, right? So I might get some of that stuff. But we have a lot of old. Yeah, our data is kind of a bit older than that. Sorry, what? We still have to reprocess. You've lost me, mate. You completely lost me there. Oh shit! That one's like. Yeah. So go back. Let me complete the compilers. So yeah, we'd imagine if you did this across Windows and Goodware, you'd get a very similar thing. And obviously, when we're doing this, we want to impersonate Goodware. You can go for Windows, but we'll talk about it in a bit. It gets really complicated. So one of our honorable mentions is sections. This got complicated real quick because there is a lot. These are the documented ones from MSDN. So if you load up the MSDN PE format, you'll see these guys. There's actually not other column with loads of offsets, but these are what we're considering standard. So when we look at these, does this graph have, so we get something like this. This is the top 25 section names in Goodware. Let me come over here. So you'll see the usual suspects like resource, text, relocation, our data, the various, datas and the TLS and those kind of things. Oh yeah. And then if you look at Windows, they're only really using text, resource, relocation, data, and our data. But this is one of those things where you kind of just fight an ML, really. There's nothing typically, realistically actionable here, I don't think. But what was, you just switch slides, what have you switched to? Oh, then you look at that across malware, and it gets funky, man. You got these guys, who nothing came back with those guys, they didn't pass, because they were random bytes. You got UPX, if you're familiar with UPX. Don't use that. That's awful. And things like new secs and new sections being made, ASPack, that's another packer. These things really stand out. So when you start to look at using packers to protect your binaries, you are creating new sections typically. I can't speak for all, obviously, packers, but the main ones like UPX, ASPack, they're going to create these things. And they're just anomalies straight up. So I guess the only actionable thing here is to just not pack, really. Just take better care of your binary, have it outside the binary cache strip, take care of it. In the paper that we have, we've expanded on these a little bit. So the resource and .text, we expect it to be massive for malware. Just typically that's where people shove their shellcode and things like that. However, it doesn't reflect here, which is interesting. But I suspect when you look at the entropy of these things, again, that's in the paper, not much in this talk, the entropy will be much higher for those in comparison. So the best practices, with all that in mind, there's a lot to consider. Building implants is hard. I think the people that put it online that it's mod devs fun and easy are, not considering all the possibilities. So, next slide, please. We have this monstrosity. So I have a blog coming out for TS in about 2-3 weeks that discusses the first 4 cells of this. But essentially, we have this key up here, optional, preferred, and paranoia. I'm extremely paranoid when it comes to payload generation. The blog that TS are releasing is about how Alice PC checked into my C2 not long ago, and I hated it. I nuked the whole C2 and did everything again. But we're going to talk through this. So we're going to break this down into a few different categories, as we'll see going through the slides. But we have these things. So environmental keying, host keying, and external keying. That's a lot. They really should be read. But I've made them optional because I think you should always consider them. So environmental keying, I don't know, check the environment is correct. So the domain name, a file exists in sysvol, these kind of things. Host keying, obviously specific to the host. You could use the cryptography GUID. Caveat with that example is, I think if you use a golden image, the system GUID's the same. You could use host name, username, whatever. And I had a third one for external keying, which is trying to pull out an IPv4 from a DNS record or a GUID from a TXT record, that kind of thing. Just make sure I can get out of the environment. Again, that's incredibly paranoid. You probably do one of those things, but I do all 3. Anti-debug and anti-VM, maybe if you're feeling fancy. I've never actually used those. That's not true actually. I've never used anti-debug. Anti-VM I've used once or twice, but that's usually as the persistence one. So once it's landed and I'm happy where I am, then I can just lock it down to that virtual machine technology, just in case, guy takes it off the VirtualBox now, then you can't fire it. We've got the retrieve payload remotely. That's a paranoia thing. You can shove it in, and you can use, Mark spoke about, with UIDs, MAC addresses, SVGs, CSS. Transforming the shellcode into something not normal. Then we get the loading routine and execution routine. Obviously, if you don't have those, you're not going to fire, right? So loading routine, can be whatever you want it to be. I guess the typical approach is virtual alloc, protect, memcopy, those kind of things. You get as fancy as you want there. Then obviously the execution routine, how you're going to fire that off. And once you've done all those things, you end up in these final steps. Defensive impairment, don't always recommend doing. That's definitely a case-by-case with the EDI you're working with. If you want to work with ETW, AMSI, WFP, go for it. DLR load, callbacks, those kind of things, nuke those if you want to. Then you get some, post-execution cleanup, doing it to free memory, delete a file, or stuff like that. And once you're at that point, you're in the PE management, which is kind of, does this technique I'm doing require specific exports? Am I a COM DLL? Do I need to do DLL get class objects and all these kind of things? Entry point, am I changing the entry point for whatever reason? Probably not. If you're using something like, I guess, RAD again, his WTSRM project that has a custom entry point, but his whole thing is bringing the CRT out of it. And binary post-processing, so that's like code signing, the embedding, the spoofed, I don't want to call them spoofed imports, but what to call them, adding another PE's imports into it. And these fall into these categories where preload, load, post-load, and post-compilation. This is how I plan to build an implant prior to any stage actually of a red team. And again, it's just instill paranoia the way I do this. And if we map this back to what we spoke about today, we get something like this. So your entropy is directly impacted by the file size by pulling it out from somewhere else. You could probably even replace that with like WebDAV or an internal UNC share. We actually did that yesterday. Internal share did that yesterday. Imports can be managed down here, as well as the imports. So when we say PE management as well, that is resolving some things dynamically, importing others, again, to kind of mask the intention of what your binary is going to be doing. And then you can use it in binary post-processing of shoving them in after the fact. And again, signing is obviously a post-compilation. Well, with MSVC, it's during compilation, I guess, right? But those kind of things. So that's kind of my process of doing this, and it's one I would encourage other developers to kind of, I'm not saying use my methodology, right, but at least think about it at this scale, so that when you coming up against different levels of EDR, you can plan accordingly, and that's what this kind of goes for.
So, cover the methodology, had a look at the data across goodware, Windows, and malware, and thinking with this sort of how we're going to approach building a payload for a given project with that in mind. Final thoughts. Again, appreciate this is a really quick run through of a subset of the total sort of stuff we've been able to do, but based on the wider sort of data we've gotten back, some initial ML, AI stuff we've been doing as well, and this, some pretty straightforward conclusions really. Windows is really hard to mimic. It's hard to mimic exactly accurately. It can be done, but it takes a bit of effort, a lot of effort, takes a bit of investment. You've got to be willing to have stuff burnt. From at least a static perspective, there's a lot of things to get right, and it might fall apart when you start one time. There's probably too many things to get right. Mimicking goodware is a bit easier. There's a lot more variance in the data. There's a lot more room for you to fit in, basically. Most malware doesn't even bother. So from what we can see on the data, most malware that's still working, balls to the wall, just run. It's a bit like the sad feeling got looking at like the Conti leaks, where it turns out they just use PowerShell. Like APTs just use PowerShell. And it kind of fed into this sort of pet theory we've been toying with. I don't know, I think I've probably heard other people speaking about it as well. Not going to call it original, but this idea that pen testing as its own IOC, as its own like APT label, is kind of distinguishable from actual malware that's in the wild, and it kind of stands out. You can see, even going back to the code signing, there's this kind of, some people have bothered to sign up for a company just to apply for a Microsoft certificate, coming all the way back into mimicking the imports, getting the research right to kind of blend in. But the main takeaway is really, that is a great thing to do. If you can do it on every project, more power to you. If you can afford to do it on every project, even better. If you have clients that you can afford to bill for it, cushy, that's the right place to be. But for the most part, if you're just shoving shit out based on you've got a problem and there's an interesting binary you found that can solve it, or an interesting project, that can solve it, fix your binary, it's probably not going to be great. Just shoving random stuff into your implant doing a little, but like not bothering to do any post steps afterwards, it's going to make you stand out more than if you just use Meterpreter, at least on a static level. There's the caveat, obviously, we've done this statically. At runtime, you're going to be probably nixed immediately, but it's just this interesting horseshoe theory coming in. But yeah, worse than using a well-honed loader or even Meterpreter, but with that same runtime caveat.
One other thing to mention with the final thought on this slide is, I can't remember his name, OA Labs guy, I can't remember his name, but he's always talking about on his streams how he can spot a red team implant immediately. And that's kind of where this whole idea of talk came from, was how could we stop him from thinking that? And it comes down to very carefully mimicking goodware, and not in the fact of taking one, cloning its attributes, shoving it into your binary, looking at what the unique aspects of these goodware are, and then trying to get them into yours. That's kind of the general gist. If you're going to use some sort of Git FUD, something straight on Git or Twitter, you're going to fire it off, it's probably not going to go too well for you. It's the bottom line. Put more care. Think about everything that the implant's going to be doing. Which brings on to questions. Anyone have any questions?
1.5 minutes questions.
Yeah.
It was not tactically done, but
have you put in work into like detections based on the
No. The question was, have you put any effort into detections? No. So at the beginning we mentioned that this isn't necessarily great for blue team, this talk. It's vendor specific what we're talking about here. Because I guess you can't put in you could probably do some Yaras and look at things like that, but it's going to hit a lot of false positives.
there is something interesting which we are exploring, which is not to jump on the hype train, but training models on this just to be able to say, this is a sample, tell me what it is. You ran some tests so far, like, what was it, last week? Getting some...
Based on imports.
Yeah, based on just inputs alone, was it 98% accurate? So it's pretty good. It's not enough to immediately ban it, but yeah, just based on this data set alone, we can actually do some stuff already. And again, this is publicly available. You can pull it as well if you want to have a copy of it.
Yeah, it's more vendor specific than blue team specific this. Yeah, it's more aimed at vendor than blue team, at this level anyway.
For the code signing section, did you notice the malware certs were legitimate, like server certs, or were there also like paid certs, like sign on the SIG or limelight?
The question is about whether the code sign certs were stolen, bought for, or used with like SIG thief and these kind of things. So the...
We don't distinguish it.
No, we didn't distinguish it, but if you look at the certs there, Komodo typically have a very easy process to get them. So we're presuming, we don't know is the bottom line. Symantec, though, was definitely was it Symantec that was leaked? The Symantec one was leaked. The Komodo one, I don't think ever got leaked, but a lot of malware is signed with it. But I do know they have a very lax process to verifying that.
It's probably an interesting thing. I don't think any pen test company would agree to it, but it would be nice to compare actual operational pen test and red team against the general malware corpus, because what we're seeing in malware is going to be skewed by the fact that this is going to be random rats. It's not necessarily just going to be that pen tester sample set, but I don't know any pen test company that would agree to do that. I think we're at time now, but yeah, just to say thanks to colleagues Dan Mead and Chris Bendowski for the help reviewing the dataset, because we locked them into quite a few calls for hours at a time going over it. And thank you all very much for listening.